Alright, I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, so let's go ahead and get into it. Welcome back to BG's Books. I'm Mr. BG, and today I will be doing a different video than what I normally do. Anyway, so if you've been watching me for a while, you would know that I've been documenting my reading journey through Stephen King's Bachman books that he wrote under the pseudonym Richard Bachman. And in one of the videos, either the Blaze review or the Ranking the Richard Bachman books video, I mentioned that I wanted to do a video where I went and where I did a lot of research and did like a whole deep dive on the Richard Bachman persona. Well, this is that video. It's finally time to do it. So anyway, I have like a whole thing here that I wrote myself and printed out. It basically has like every major thing that has to do with Richard Bachman. So yeah, if you're excited for this video, I'll make sure to like and stuff. And but yeah, without further ado, I guess we should get right into this video. All right, so of course, to begin with our Richard Bachman deep dive, we of course need to find out how Richard Bachman came to be in the first place. So in regards to my notes here, let's begin. Back in the 70s and 80s, Stephen King wrote too many books in a year to publish, as the standard at the time was to only have one book per author per year. So basically, if you wrote like 7 books a year like Stephen King did, you could only publish 1 per year. And then this was due to fears of oversaturating the market. That means that like an author would be able to sell like more than like a really good book, and then the other one would like sell too much, you know, like way too many books and stuff. And another reason for this is that Stephen King wanted to test whether or not his success as an author was due to talent or by name recognition alone. So he concluded years later that the Bachman books increased in sales after he was ousted. I guess I forgot to mention, but I will be not only talking about stuff that I got from online and this, but also from the Bachman books omnibus collections, which discusses why he went into Bachman. And Stephen King has said that after Thinner was ousted as actually him, it increased in sales a lot more than it was as Bachman. So there you go. And then anyway, Richard Bachman was actually Stephen King's backup pseudonym that he came up with on the fly, because his name was originally going to be Guy Pillsbury or Gus Pillsbury, depending on the website that he got it from, based after his maternal grandfather, so his mother's father. And so it was ousted at the last minute before he was going to publish the book under the pseudonym, and so his publishers called him, frantically begging for a new name. And so he happened to be reading a Richard Stark book, and Richard Stark is the pseudonym of famous crime novelist Donald E. Westlake. So he got Richard from that. And then at the same time, Stephen King's, or at least one of his favorite bands, is Bachman Turner Overdrive, and he was listening to the song You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet. And so, of course, Bachman Turner Overdrive, he decided to take Bachman from that, so he combined Richard from Richard Stark and Bachman from Bachman Turner Overdrive and got Richard Bachman. So there you go. That's the history of Richard Bachman, the name. All right, so the next item I want to discuss on the deep dive of Richard Bachman is Richard Bachman's extensive biography. Yeah, so Stephen King was trying so hard to convince his fans that he and Bachman were different people that he made an entirely different backstory for Richard Bachman. That sounds kind of insane, I'm aware. Sorry about that, but yeah, so anyway, I have like the entire biography written down, so let's get into this. Richard Bachman was born sometime in or around 1945 in New York. Keep in mind, this is all publicly known information that Stephen King has said. He served in the military 4 years in the U.S. Coast Guard, followed by 10 years in the Merchant Marine afterwards. And then after he left the military, he met a beautiful woman whom he later married named Claudia Inez Bachman. they settled as dairy farmers in New Hampshire. So, yeah, this is already quite interesting. The Bachmans also briefly had a son who tragically died at the age of 6 when he fell into a well at the Bachman home and drowned. We're not sure what the son's name was. I don't think Stephen King ever came up with that. All I found was that it was a son. I don't know any name or anything. Anyway, so Bachman was also known as a nocturnal writer because he suffered from chronic insomnia. And so he spent his sleepless nights writing on his Olivetti typewriter. My editor can probably show you a picture of what that looks like right here or something. Anyway, so at the time of Bachman's death, he published 5 novels with 2 more published after his death, or posthumously. And we'll get to those in a second. And finally, Richard Bachman died on April 9th, 1985. His cause of death was cancer of the pseudonym, which Stephen King describes as a fictional condition described as a rare form of schizonomia. But Stephen King has come out saying Bachman's actual death, or actual cause of death, was shock, from the shock of being found out. And so, yeah, that's basically the general history of Richard Bachman. I know that's a lot of history to come up with for a fictional person, but I just kind of love the effort that Stephen King went through to do all this just for it to mean nothing in the end. So, yeah. But, yeah, that was the history of Richard Bachman. All right, so the next point I want to discuss is this thing. Who on earth is this guy in the picture? Well, this guy in the picture actually is a real guy. And so this picture, credited to Claudia Inez Bachman for the back of Thinner, was actually a photo of a man named Richard Manuel, the insurance agent of Stephen King's longtime literary agent, Kirby McCauley. Yeah, so I guess Kirby McCauley gave this Richard guy a call. He was like, "Hey, you wanna be on a book back? You want to be on the back of a book?" And he was like, "Sure." And so they took this picture, and then the rest was history. And yeah, basically the reason why I forgot to write this down, but the reason why that picture was even needed to be taken in the first place was because Stephen King had already gotten many fan letters at this time asking him if he really was Bachman or not. And so to further prove that him and Bachman were different people, he took a picture of this guy and put it on the back of Thinner. So there you go. Again, that all went to nothing, but I just love the effort that Stephen King went through. All right, and so the next item I want to discuss is how Richard Bachman was actually ousted as Stephen King in the first place. So, of course, as we already went through, by the time that he was discovered, he had already published 5 novels, which, of course, we will get to in a moment. The most latest was Thinner, and this was the most like Stephen King Bachman book that was written. I mean, it has like parts of it in Maine. It even has 2 references to Stephen King by name, which is very interesting. Again, he wrote that knowing it was a Bachman book, but I don't know. He kind of got himself with that one. I don't know. And yeah, basically it was kind of limited time. People already started figuring out that he was Bachman already. And so, but of course Stephen King always denied it, as it's been clear. So of course, here's how he was actually discovered. In 1985, a bookstore clerk in Washington, D.C. named Steve Brown, he was reading Thinner and noticed the similarities to Stephen King's and Bachman's writing. So, because he was in D.C., he walked right down to the Library of Congress, where he looked at the copyright forms of one of the Bachman books, to which I found that they were the copyright forms of Rage, where he found that Rage was actually, because Rage was a Bachman book, the copyright form on it was written to Stephen King. So that's how he was found. So Brown then wrote a letter to Stephen King's publishers with the attached documents and asked them how they wanted to proceed. And so this is where stuff gets really interesting. 2 weeks later, Brown received a phone call from Stephen King personally, where Stephen King said this to him, and I'm quoting this verbatim. "Steve Brown, this is Steve King. All right, you know I'm Bachman. I know I'm Bachman. What are we going to do about it? Let's talk." And so that's where the legendary conversation began. And so these two discussed, and then Stephen King went public about it later in 1985. And then, of course, released the Bachman Books Omnibus, like this one right here. And so, yeah, and then this is, of course, when Bachman died. And so, yeah, April 9th, 1985, I guess. So, yeah, that's how Richard Bachman was discovered. All right, so now we will be getting into the works of Richard Bachman, or his extended bibliography. The first of which was Rage, published in 1977. Now, Rage was actually written by Stephen King back in 1966 as a senior in high school, and then he kind of put it off for a while, but he later finished it in 1971 after he was married. And so it was in publication for about 20 years, and then some unfortunate situations involving recreations of it took it out of print in 1997. I have a whole video for all the Bachman books, so if you're interested for more about Rage, either do your own research or watch my video where I go in depth about that. But the second Bachman book was The Long Walk, published in 1979. And Rage might have been the first book that Stephen King wrote, but The Long Walk was the first book that Stephen King completed or finished. And, of course, it got a movie this year, which was very popular. And then the third Bachman book is Roadwork, published in 1981. And this was written in 1973, shortly after Stephen King's mother died, as he was trying to explore his feelings of grief and stuff for her. It was basically kind of like therapy for grieving over his mother who passed away. And I mean, if you read it, you can very clearly tell he was grieving for someone while reading Roadwork, and it just happened, or writing Roadwork, and it happened to be his mother. Anyway, so the fourth Bachman book was The Running Man, published in 1982. It also got a movie this year. But this was also written back in 1973, similar to Roadwork. But Stephen King can't really remember if it was written in 3 days or a week. He said in the Bachman Books Omnibus, like this one, that it took him 72 hours to write it. But in actual interviews, he said that it took him a week while on spring break when he was teaching English at his high school. So either way, he wrote it in 1973 and it was published in 1982. And another interesting fact is that it also includes Derry, Maine, which is, of course, the main location in it. Again, Stephen King wasn't planning on being ousted as Bachman, so I would have loved to see how he would have explained the fact that his book and Bachman's book have the exact same location in the exact same place. I don't know, that's just funny to me. It was also the first appearance of Derry, Maine in Stephen King's books, which was very interesting. And then, of course, the fifth Bachman book, which got Bachman ousted as Stephen King, was Thinner, published in 1984. This was actually the first Bachman book to be written under the Bachman name, because all of them were written under Stephen King, and then, of course, stuff, and then Richard Bachman came into the picture. And so, yeah, it was the book that ousted Bachman as the same person as Stephen King, because the writing was just too similar. As I said, there was Maine in there, and then just a bunch of other stuff that just made too much sense for it to be two different people. And then, so the sixth one that was after Bachman died was The Regulators, published in 1996 posthumously, and it was known as a trunk novel. A trunk novel was basically, Stephen King imagined that after Richard Bachman had died, Claudia Inez Bachman was kind of going through the attic, kind of taking out some of his stuff, and then she found this trunk with some manuscripts in them written by Bachman when he was alive, and one of them was The Regulators. And so that's a trunk novel. And so it was written as a companion piece to the Stephen King novel Desperation. Desperation was finished one day, and then Regulators was started the next, and they both released on the same day in 1996. I think that day was November something. I don't remember the day, but I think it was November 1996. So there you go. And then, of course, the final Bachman novel, which was also a trunk book, was Blaze. This was also written in 1973, similar to The Running Man and Roadwork. And it was the final Bachman book to be published in 2007. And so Stephen King has later said that he doesn't plan on releasing any more Bachman books. In fact, Blaze was kind of a joke publication, but, you know, never say never. It's also basically Stephen King's version of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. So there you go. But those are Richard Bachman's bibliography, also known as his works. All right, so one final section here that's basically all about like the life of Richard Bachman and his works and stuff, but I just kind of want to include some interesting facts about Bachman that you might not have known had you not seen his interviews or read this, you know, the omnibus. Anyway, so for one thing, Richard Bachman was not the only pseudonym that Stephen King had, only the most famous. The first of which is John Swithin, used once to publish the short story The Fifth Quarter in the April 1972 edition of Cavalier magazine, and then The Fifth Quarter was later collected into Stephen King's 1993 collection, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. So there you go. The second pseudonym that he had is Beryl Evans, used once to publish Charlie the Choo Choo, a children's book that Stephen King wrote. In fact, there's like a whole joke on it. It has a quote from him saying, if I were to write a children's book, this would be it. And that's funny because it is actually him just under a different name. And basically, what this was is that in The Dark Tower 3, The Wastelands, one of the characters named Eddie Dean, and I guess other characters find it in the book. It's called Charlie the Choo Choo and stuff. And so I guess Stephen King decided to make a real-life version of that fictional book in The Wasteland. So that was pretty interesting. The train in Charlie also has a face like the train in Wastelands, later becoming the same train. This is something I'm not too clear on. I haven't read The Dark Tower yet, so that part may be kind of inaccurate. But from what I read about that, it seems that like the train like either became inspired by the train from the book or something, and then like became evil or something. I don't know. It's something weird along those lines, but I don't know if that's the correct way to word it, if you know what that means. And this is probably one of the most interesting facts about Richard Bachman, is that at the time of Bachman's exposure, Stephen King was in the middle of writing his now famous novel Misery. And in fact, according to the Bachman Books Omnibus, he even said that Misery was going to be a Bachman novel before Bachman was ousted as Stephen King. So there you go. Misery, one of my favorite books of all time and one of my favorite Stephen King books of all time, was almost a Bachman book. Very interesting. And then the last one here is that after all this Richard Bachman stuff, Stephen King kind of wanted to explore his feelings about Richard Bachman and also the freedom of not being Stephen King but writing as someone else. And so he wrote a whole novel about that, and he called that novel The Dark Half. And basically, The Dark Half is about a man named Thad Beaumont who wrote some books under the name George Stark. And then after a while, Mr. Beaumont decided to kill George Stark or retire the pseudonym, similar to what Stephen King did. But this is a more fictional version where the pseudonym actually comes to life and starts wreaking havoc across Castle Rock, Maine. So yeah, that's very interesting. But anyway, those are the last of the facts that I wanted to share about Richard Bachman, but I just thought they were really interesting, so I wanted to put them in the video. But that is the end of the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this massive deep dive into Richard Bachman. I'm pretty sure I covered everything. Of course, as I said, with the amount of dedication that Stephen King put into making Richard Bachman a different person other than himself, I'm sure I missed one or two things along the line, but I basically gathered all the information that I had available to me, and so I just kind of compiled them here. So again, I could be missing one or two things, but I think I got like most of it. And I hope you guys learned something. It's like the Misery thing, that was certainly very interesting the first time I read that. I did not expect that. And so yeah, that was very interesting. But anyway, what do you guys feel about Richard Bachman? Have you read any of his books? Have you read none of his books? Have you read all of them like me? Or is that a part of Stephen King you don't really want to get into? But yeah, I would love hearing your opinions on Richard Bachman and all this stuff. It's a very interesting story if you look into it yourself. This has been very interesting, certainly. And yeah, as I said, I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, but I just have kind of been putting it off, but here I am. It's almost the end of the year. I wanted to get this video out before I review The Dark Half. Which I'm just gonna say The Dark Half will be the finale of my Pseudonym breakdowns or reviews or whatever you want to call them. So The Dark Half will kind of be the end of the Richard Bachman saga. I know it's very sad. I've enjoyed reading Bachman's books as well, but every good thing must come to an end. But anyway, I guess I'm just rambling at this point. But yeah, as I said, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below if you have not already. I have surpassed 300 subscribers, so now I am on the road to 400. So I would really appreciate it if you guys could help me reach that goal. But anyway, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learning something about Richard Bachman. But anyway, that is the end of the video. I've been Mr. Breezy. This has been BG's Books, and I will see you guys in the next video.